We are ready. Good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure for me to moderate this table. I would like to continue the discussion of the table before, but first I will ask all the participants in this table to make a brief presentation and also to tell us a little bit about how do you think the information discussed in these 2 days is related to your activities. So we can have an idea, especially for the people working at INEGI, so they can have, the experts can have an idea of what they are doing at INEGI. So I would like to start with Mario.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mario Santillana. I'm the General Coordinator of the surveys at INEGI in the fields of government, public security, and justice. And well, I'm involved in all the parts of the process of the making of a survey, from the budget issues and the design, the conceptual and statistical design, and well, all the stages that implies the big responsibility of making indicators in these matters. Well, this we have developed 10 national projects. We studied the victimization and perception of public security. We have 5 projects in this field. We have in government performance 3 projects. The risk factors among the young people are also studied in this area. Well, there are many editions of this. The many editions of this service have taught us that some of the methodologies being applied can be improved. We have so many challenges, and that's one of the main reasons why we're here. We want to discuss with the experts mainly what to do with the treatment of non-response rates, what to do when the size of the population is small, and or when the phenomenon we are trying to measure is very scarce. What are the best sampling techniques to apply? And well, that will be one of our main interests here in this discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ramón Bravo. Actually, I'm in charge of the services survey at INEGI. In my expertise area, it's the processing of the data from the view of the producer. I mean, I'm not a statistical person, but I deal with the statistical work. From my perspective, the cost is increasingly in the last years. One of the things we are doing is try to get data through internet, or looking for new sources of data like administrative records or big data. But in terms of economic data, is not so easy. Maybe we need to work more with the tax administration, or looking other sources. And well, that's my expertise.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rocio Meza, and I work at the General Coordination of Regional Operations. The area I belong to doesn't have much inherence in the survey design, but in the field work, and in particular in the direction I belong to, I think one of the main goals we have is to guarantee that the state coordinates collect the information in the way it was designed. That is one of the main goals of our coordination.
Hello, everybody. I am Gonzalo Pérez. I am one of the advisors of the president at the National Statistics Office. And one of the main goals I have is to define some quality indicators for the surveys at INEGI. So these talks have been very useful for me because for me it has a challenge to implement or to compute the indicators at this organization, because somehow they think you are evaluating the work they are doing. So it's very difficult. They accept to compute, for example, the response rates and to make them public. So even when it's very easy, it's very important to start the non-response. We have not defined some quality indicators we have to follow. So for me, maybe we are in a step in the first steps to start implementing this kind of designs, because we are just realizing maybe we have a problem and maybe we have to do something. So for me, all the experiences applying these quality indicators has been very useful, and I hope they can make some more recommendations so we can define some indicators for all the surveys so we can do something about that.
Hello again, Paul Biemer, RTI International, and distinguished fellow. My background is in statistics, as you may know. I guess you could say, you know, my focus recently and probably most of my career has been on total survey error. About 2011, I was approached by Statistics Sweden. They had a very bad problem in their consumer statistics, and a quality problem that I can go into later. But basically, the Minister of Finance told them or mandated that they do something to try to improve the quality across a number of their programs. It was like 10 different official statistics programs. And so they contacted me, and together we developed a methodology we called ASPIRE. Ultimately, it stands for a System for Process Improvement, Review, and Evaluation. And it's a system of indicators that actually will allow you to pinpoint across a number of different products, statistical products. It could be, you know, one, it could be a dozen statistical products. In our case, it was 10, where you may have common problems across official statistics, where you may have more unique problems and so forth, and developing plans for actually making improvements, either to improve the quality, reduce the cost. There are other dimensions of quality, for example, and not only accuracy, but also timeliness and comparability, those kinds of issues as well. But we were mainly addressing accuracy. And so if you're interested, you can go to a JOS 2014 article that I'm the lead author. Biemer, Truin, Bergdahl, and Yapek, 2014 JOS. It's a system for managing the quality of official statistics is the title. And it spells out exactly what we did, and that program now has been going on for 8 years, and they're continuing to do this. We looked at the national accounts, we looked at the labor force survey, we looked at consumer expenditure survey, we looked at the consumer price index, which was really where the quality problem was, and that sort of was the impetus for this. So that's one approach. I will say that I think that adaptive survey design or art designs, whatever you want to refer to them, it's a great set of tools, but it's not the only set of tools, and I think of it as a set of tools. I don't think of it as a solution. I think the solution for reducing costs and so forth can be achieved possibly by applying these techniques. For example, in a recent survey, the Ad Health survey that I'm working on currently, they had a big cost problem in the sense that they could no longer afford to do the Ad Health survey in the way that they've been doing it before because their funding was cut. Well, the solution was to find a cheaper way to do that survey. And so that was being done in face-to-face interviewing. We went to a web mail survey using in-person follow-up using a subsample of non-respondents. Now, art design helped us achieve the objectives that we set forth for that survey in order to be able to make the transition from face-to-face to self-administered and then the two-phase design. But it was very powerful approach to getting there, but the solution was changing the mode. And so that's why I would say that these techniques that we're talking about here is they're tools, but I want to echo what's been said before. I think Andy said it very well. Set out your objectives, determine what your objectives are, because from the last panel, I wasn't sure what the objectives were, since they seem to vary across the panel. What are the objectives? And then decide what tools you need to achieve those objectives.
I'm Guillermina Eslava. I'm a university teacher at the Faculty of Science, and I regularly teach statistics courses to actuarial science students. And I also teach sampling methods to the master and to the bachelor degree. Part of my research is the little time I get left. I do some graphical models directed at undirected graphs, better known as Markov and Bayesian networks. But recently I've been working with Omar de la Riva as a postdoc, and his area of research is sampling methods. And we start to work with a response propensity model, which usually, as I see it, is just, not just, but it's a model to estimate the probability that a random variable y that takes two values, 0, 1, the probability that y equals 1 given the rest. One of the main models for that, and very much used, is logistic regression. Then we thought, oh, what happened if we estimate that probability with a Markov or Bayesian network? So we are trying to do that, and we are using data from the 2015 Intercensal survey, because, well, that survey is very huge and is very rich, and it has some data, some part of the country that was surveyed, and another one was a census. And we are working in Oaxaca, which 1/3 of the population in Oaxaca was surveyed. So we are actually working with census data for Oaxaca, 2015. And we are using as auxiliary information, gender, age, language, which means a reflection of ethnicity, which is whether they speak an indigenous language or they don't, employment position, and educational level. The outcome is the income, and we in the very beginning in research, we thought that a Markov graph or a graphical model was going to really to outperform logistic regression, but we are starting to doubt whether that is going to be the case, but the research is like that. So we are doing that. We hope to get somewhere. Omar has been doing all the computing and all the trying, and this is part of my research, and I'm very happy to be able to join what I've been doing in one side of the research, which are the graphical models, and to use them in sampling, and also to work with the Mexican data, which tells something. And there are two final comments. These variables that I mentioned, I was very surprised that they are very similar to those mentioned for statistics the Netherlands. They also mentioned some variables they use in the video conference that was yesterday. They use those variables, and today in the video conference they also mentioned some variables, and they are about the same. So in similarities are there, and there are some basic things that are. So I'm not able to comment about this very interesting area of responsive and adaptive survey design, but of course a lot of statistical methodology is behind that can be used, and the more we know, the more we innovate in a sense. But there was a comment in the previous table given by, I'm sorry, by one of the commentators, Andy. Andy. And he said that when he gave a recommendation, which is, I believe is true for this for our country. He says, do the basics, start from the beginning and then go grown, rather than have a dream of a large system and so, and then you realize that it's not there. Start to build from the bottom and continue growing. That's also what I say to my students. When they come and ask me for a PhD or something they want to do, I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not the greatest statistician, and we are not in Harvard or Cambridge or so, but I'm only Guillermina, and so we have to stand on the floor. So, but it has been to me very illustrating, and I hope to bring a lot, rather than giving something, I hope to bring something to my courses. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Martín Romero. I work at the National Institute of Public Health in Mexico, and there I have two duties. One is teaching, and the second is to work in the sampling design and the analysis of the surveys that the institute works. And this, let me say, regarding the questions that said, what's your name? Your name? Mario asked, I want to say two easy thoughts that came for me. The thing is that the no response always will occur. And the best thing that we could do, in my experience, is to try to understand why it occurs. Because once we know the reasons why the no response occurs, we could proceed to try to apply a model. We saw many wonderful techniques that it requires an X. And the key point is to find an X that explains the no response in that case. The second part is about the quality. I also work in the task of monitoring the surveys, and sometimes we get in the stressful situations because as a statistician, I said this variance is not expected, and the team on the field says, why do you say that? Then we have got into very stressful situations. For me, probably the best solution in this case is, since the beginning of the survey, to define the quality standards. Because once you define the quality standards from the beginning, you start designing back. And then all the team agrees on what to do to get the goals. But when we have done this, sometimes we get in this, what is happening? And then, because we didn't plan it, we got in the stressful situations. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. So I would like to continue the discussion of the table before. So the last question was how to start implementing, what are the recommendations for implementing these adaptive survey designs at INEGI, especially. And to start, I will ask people at INEGI here on the table to make some questions or to think a little bit about the challenges we have or the information we already have, para data maybe. So Paul maybe or Martin can give us some advice. So how to start at INEGI?
Well, I have a question for the experts in general. Since 2013, we've been developing the National Survey on urban public security. And, we haven't had problems with the non-response rate at an aggregated level. But people continuously demand high quality indicators at the disaggregated level. So looking at the extremes, the extreme classification, we have the most secure cities like Mérida, in which we have elements to make secure that we are making a good estimations, but there's another case, there's a special case of the city of San Pedro, that is a city in the metropolitan area of Monterrey, and has the lower insecurity perception, but also for us has the higher non-response rate. So when the people ask for a more deeper analysis, we are limited in our explanation. So I would like to know from your perspective, what will be the best techniques to know how well is that estimation, even when we're having a high non-response rate. I remember Mr. Biemer's position early that talked about balancing indicators. I don't know if that could be applied to this scheme, or could be another techniques to have more arguments to support that estimation.
Let me tell you just a real short story about what happened in Statistics Sweden. So they were very concerned about the labor force survey. The response rate dropped from like 70% to about 50% in 10 years, and it was continuing to go down. So we, made the point, and I think it was a very important point, that what they really ought to be focusing on is the bias. How much bias is there? But there's a lot of, I guess, credibility for the organization tied to the response rate. When users see response rates are low, they don't think in terms of, well, the bias may not be big. They think, what's happening to the response rate? So they applied a lot of the techniques we've been talking about, sample balancing. There's a couple of papers that were published by Statistics Sweden looking at sample balancing. But we encouraged them to really look at the bias, and when they looked at the bias, now let me just make the point that they have a register there. It's a population register, very, very extensive information on the members of their population, and they can employ very effective non-response adjustment techniques. And a lot of analysis they did indicated that they had very little bias. Even if they had a lot of non-response, they had very little bias. So a lot of this wasn't necessarily can be solved by the techniques that we're talking about. I mean, it wasn't really a problem to be solved. You see what I'm saying? But there was this. The problem wasn't the bias. The problem was the perception of the credibility of the survey as a result of the response rate dropping. So through a lot of analysis over several years, they made the decision through our recommendations that part of the problem was the way that they were collecting the data in-house, and they decided to move the data collection and part of the data collection outsource it to another firm, because they were restricted in-house by the unions in terms of when their interviewers could be working. And so they traced the problem basically back to their own interviewing staff. There was a lot of non-response, non-contact because some of the interviewers wouldn't work on the weekends, didn't want to work in the evenings. And of course, how do you contact people? This is a phone survey if you don't work weekends and evenings. But they don't have that problem when they go to outsourcing. So that was part of the solution. The response rates went up as a result of outsourcing. It didn't go up dramatically, but they were able to, I think, stem the tide of the slippage. You know, in other words, it stemmed it from going down any further, and it went up slightly. Now, through other analysis, they found out that one of the reasons was the company that they outsourced it to was getting a lot more proxy interviews. And when you get proxy interviews, of course, you don't have to get the person you're targeting in the household. You can talk to a spouse or something like that. You can get a higher response rate by getting more proxies. So they had to control that. So I'm just telling you the story just to be able to emphasize that it's important to find out first of all, do you have a problem with bias? Or is the problem sort of the perception or the credibility of the survey as a result of low response, or what is basically the problem? And find out what the problem is, sort of what Martín was saying, you know, if you know what the problem is, you're better able to address the problem. And it may be that the problem is bias, that you do have a bias problem, and then understand where that bias is coming from and use our adaptive survey design, responsive survey design techniques maybe as a tool to be able to solve the balancing problem, perhaps even increase response rates somewhat.
I have a similar example. That was the stressful survey. It was a survey on addictions. When they finished the survey was okay, it has balance, a good response and everything. But once the data got published, they got that the estimates were concordant or according with the consumption of alcohol and tobacco by the industry. So that situation put a lot of stress on the survey. And then that took us, and part of me, about 6 months to get into the survey to find what was the reason. And the reason was that over the time, the prevalence of consumption decreased. That was absolutely not, there was no reason to happen. And from that experience, my advice, some comment is that try to verify your survey with some hard data. And also in the same direction that Paul, that sometimes the bias is in the process of measurement. Mm-hmm. And we, in many cases, we think that this is the less risk operation, the measurement. But from that, from that experience, we decide to do the things in a different way. And one of the things that we did in the next survey was to do basically 2 surveys. One round that covered all the republic, all the states, all the country, and then in the other round, all the country. Then the cost was increased.
¡Hey! Hoy voy a enseñaros cómo hice mi sitio web profesional.
On what was happening.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. In economic surveys, we try to analyze the data in order to give techniques minimize variability when we change the sample or we update the framework, because maybe the difference is, we understand the difference because we have a change of the sample methodology, but in economic sense, is not a good answer. And the other one is how to improve the quality of the service, but at the same time reduce the cost, applying this methodology.
Okay, those are tough questions. So on the one hand, if I understand what you're saying, you may have redesigned a survey or somehow changed the survey, and you will get some effect from that on the results, which could be purely methodological. However, those differences, the difference between, say, the old methodology and the new methodology, or the old design and the new design, get interpreted as real change. And so when the National Council uses that information, they're going to get a bias in the GDP or something like that as a result of a mode effect or some sort of change, that methodological effect. And I don't know how to really address that without estimating the methodological effect. And to estimate that methodological effect sometimes is expensive. For example, on the survey I was telling you about, where it's the Ad Health survey, where we're changing the mode from face-to-face to mixed mode with the mail web and then a face-to-face follow-up. This is a panel survey, so if most of the sample, the entire wave then is done with this new methodology, and they're going to be comparing it to face-to-face interviewing, and they're going to get a difference which could be purely methodological, because face-to-face gives you a different, maybe a distribution of responses, possibly, than mixed mode. So in order to be able to estimate that, well, fortunately we have a panel survey. So part of the way that we're going to estimate that is by using the panel design in a latent class. It's called Markov latent class analysis. But we still needed to have a sample that was collected at the same time as this mixed mode, a sample that was conducted by the old methodology. So we could estimate the effect of the old methodology against the new methodology for the same point in time. So, but that required resources. It wasn't a very large sample, but nevertheless, and there probably are going to be some effects from scale up and all that we won't be able to estimate. But still, we were able to simultaneously estimate the old mode, using the old methodology against the new methodology, and allow us to then estimate the methodological effects. And then we could publish that methodological effect for a number of characteristics for users who could then better interpret their longitudinal analysis. So that's how I would suggest, that's what our solution was, and that's how I would suggest you try to deal with that problem. Now, as far as reducing cost for a survey without changing quality, that's entirely possible. For example, we heard, Gabby's presentation where, and also I think others mentioned that, you can spend a lot of money on follow-up for non-response and it really not be necessary. In fact, I found that true with Statistics Sweden on the labor force survey. They were spending enormous amounts of money trying to get the response rate up, and it had a relatively small effect on the response rate relative to the amount of money they were spending. It wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the increase in response rate, 1 percentage point increase for a lot of money. And in the analysis, it really didn't change the estimates. In other words, they weren't really increasing the response rate, didn't really change the estimates that much, because they were doing the balancing and all that stuff to try to maintain some representativity as they were trying to increase response rates. I think one might suggest to them that you live with this lower response rate and use balancing, which is the adaptive design, to try to mitigate to the extent possible the non-response bias, and then use the statistical adjustments, post-survey adjustments, to take it the rest of the way. And if you have very good data that you can, on the non-respondents, of course, that you can use to model the adjustments, which they did. You can basically ensure that you don't have any bias and you're saving a lot of money and that money that you save can be put in other areas. For example, doing cognitive interviews to try to get more clarity in the questioning so that you're getting better data from the people who are responding would be a priority. Or maybe there are other ways in which you can use that money that you're spending to try to get response rates up in ways that would really improve quality in terms of accuracy a lot more than any minor increase in response rate.
Only a short comment is that in our experience, it's worth to invest in the control group in order to identify, because each survey is a different exercise of inference. So you will know exactly what happened on the survey that you did. And the only way to know that is to have the control group. Otherwise, you will get with a doubt that no solution, because you will not answer what happened. And what happened is may cost the budget of the big survey. So in our experience, it's worth is to be risk-free.
Well, my question is for you. You mentioned in your talk that all surveys make use of adaptive procedures at some extent, even though they don't call them that. And of course, each of our state coordinates has its own ways and its own strategies to adapt to the many different situations they face on an everyday basis. Some states have higher levels of insecurity or some things like that. And the question is, how can we start formalizing these individual attempts and how to measure their effects, whether they're positive or negative, and make them compatible to the objectives and the strategies established by the designing areas?
Excellent question. Yeah, I think that it's true. I mean, I think that maybe the difference in what some surveys are doing in terms of adaptive design and others is the level of sophistication and the effectiveness of the methods, because some methods again are being been used for many years. For example, looking at the level of effort in the field and try to spread level of effort around, looking for problem areas, trying to send in maybe traveling interviewers to relieve some of the burden on interviewers in order to be able to get response rates up. Those solutions have all been done. But it may be that there are more sophisticated techniques that would be more effective. And I think that I have to come back to, the methods that we've been using should not be discontinued. I think that staff would benefit from some training, not just on the techniques that we were talking about today and all about adaptive design, but also training on total survey error, because they have to, I think it's important to put things in perspective. First of all, I think, I know in my own experience, sometimes I deal with the project director, because at RTI, the way that we're organized is, we have a client who's external, but then we have an internal person who directs the project. And the project director kind of calls the shots, unless the client has some strong views. Typically, it's the project director. And sometimes the project director doesn't fully appreciate some of the consequences of things like interviewers who aren't well trained, or you have non-response issues. You can have data quality issues within the questionnaire. There can be eligibility issues which aren't really well defined within the questionnaire, which will cause biases. And some of those things are, not taught in a lot of courses that you might take in, say, economics and sociology. I mean, you really need to get into survey methods to be able to really appreciate how these effects can affect the data, can affect the analysis and overall data quality. So I would say that people would benefit from some short courses that just deal with, total survey error and survey quality, to be able to put things in perspective, to be motivated to say, yes, we do need higher accuracy, and we do need to understand. So what the total error perspective does is to say, let's try to look at the survey from the perspective of all the different possible error sources. Let's try to identify those error sources that are probably the most dominant. If we have data that would allow us to do that, so much the better, but sometimes it has to be intuition. We think data processing, if there's a lot of coding, a lot of editing, maybe data processing is going to be an important issue. If the questions are very complex and they're not very well worded, maybe measurement error. It could be that we see low response rates, whatever it is, but what are the major issues? They need to be able to understand that approach, and then maybe to sort of then, sort of divide and conquer. So when I use that term divide and conquer, I mean divide the total error into its components, identify the major components, and then address those major components. And it could be that non-response may not be your major component. And so a lot of the things that we've been talking about today may not be the focus or the objective of your data improvement. But it's that whole process of how do you decide what your main error sources are, and then how to then deal with those error sources using a set of techniques. But I think having that background in total error will help before you launch into training on adaptive survey design, because they'll get this training, but they may think that the only problem is non-response.
I think it's time to thank all the participants in this table. Thank you very much for your participation, and thank you all to be here.